The quantum disruption alarms screamed their metallic warning across the bridge of the UES Tranquility. Lieutenant Commander Area Chen didn't flinch. Her eyes remained closed, breath steady, a lone figure of impossible calm amid the chaos of imminent destruction. Around her, the bridge crew mirrored her posture, back straight, hands positioned in precise mudras, neural interfaces humming with a collective energy that defied conventional military logic. To the Zotheric observation teams, it looked like a bizarre ritual. To the humans, it was survival. 15 minutes earlier, the tactical situation had been dire. The Zotheric Imperium's biomechanical fleet had emerged from quantum-slit space with surgical precision, surrounding the human expeditionary force in the Crimson Nebula. 5-to-1 odds. Conventional military doctrine suggested immediate surrender or total annihilation. But humanity had never been good at following conventional wisdom. The first wave of plasma torpedoes arrived with enough destructive potential to vaporize entire planetary defense grids. Each projectile carried the equivalent energy of a small star's critical mass, guided by predictive algorithms that had systematically dismantled countless galactic civilizations. On the bridge, Commander Chen's neural implant captured her team's collective brainwave pattern. It wasn't just communication. It was something far more profound. Each crew member drew from a different meditative tradition. Captain Rodriguez's indigenous Brazilian meditation techniques, Lieutenant Yamamoto's Zen practices, Dr. Elena Rodriguez's neuroscience-backed mindfulness protocols. The ship moved, not in the mechanical way of traditional spacecraft, but with a fluidity that defied computational prediction. Where an AI would calculate the most statistically optimal escape route, the Tranquility danced. It wove between plasma streams with a grace that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics and probability. Fascinating, muttered Dr. Kira Volkov, the Russian-Brazilian neural interface specialist. Her fingers, seemingly of their own accord, danced across holographic controls. Quantum probability is collapsing around our meditative state. We're not just avoiding attacks, we're reshaping potential outcomes. Each crew member maintained a state of total awareness. Their meditation wasn't about calm detachment, but about hyperconnection. They became a single organism, each member sensing the battlefield as an extension of their collective consciousness. The Zotheric observation teams watched in mounting horror. Their predictive models, algorithms that had systematically crushed civilizations for millennia, began to fracture. The human ship didn't just survive, it anticipated. Each movement was a living calculation that emerged not from cold computation, but from a fluid, adaptive consciousness. 3 plasma torpedoes approached from different vectors, each carrying enough destructive potential to obliterate a mid-sized moon. On a traditional warship, this would mean certain destruction. On the Tranquility, it meant an opportunity. Commander Chen's breath synchronized with the ship's quantum drive. Her team's collective consciousness transformed the vessel into something more than a machine, a living, breathing entity that responded to threat with an intelligence beyond programming. The torpedoes passed, not by conventional evasion, but by a miraculous navigation that seemed to bend the very fabric of space-time. The Zotheric commander's computational systems began to overheat, their logic circuits unable to process what they were witnessing. Meditation synchronization at 98.7%, Lieutenant Yamamoto reported, his voice calm despite the apocalyptic battle surrounding them. Quantum resonance achieving harmonic stability. It was more than a battle. It was a demonstration, a profound message to the galaxy about the true nature of human potential. Consciousness was not a limitation, but the ultimate adaptive system. And they were just getting started. Dr. Zora Kalax's reputation as the Galactic Consortium's most prestigious xenopsychologist crumbled the moment the Crimson Nebula data streams arrived. Her entire academic career, decades of research into interspecies combat psychology, was about to be rewritten. The initial data transfer came encrypted, wrapped in so many quantum security layers that it took her research team 3 standard cycles just to begin decryption. When they finally accessed the full record of the human meditation protocols, The research complex went silent. This wasn't just a combat technique. This was a complete reimagining of consciousness itself. The meditation protocols defied every existing xenological model. Unlike the rigid, genetically programmed combat responses of the Zotharak or the cybernetic augmentation preferred by the Syndicate, human meditation was a living, breathing system of cognitive adaptation. Dr. Kalax assembled a team of the galaxy's most brilliant minds. They came from a dozen different species, each bringing their unique perspective to unravel the human mystery. The Andromeda neural physicist, the Quantum Collective's top computational expert, a retired Zotharak combat strategist. Each brought their most advanced analytical tools, and each found themselves completely outmatched. The human meditation protocols weren't just a single technique. They were a comprehensive ecosystem of cognitive enhancement drawn from thousands of years of human cultural development. Each tradition contributed something unique. Tibetan monk breathing techniques that stabilized neural pathways under extreme stress. Indigenous Australian walkabout meditations that expanded spatial awareness beyond physical limitations. Silicon Valley mindfulness protocols that optimized cognitive processing at quantum levels. Brazilian capoeira meditation that integrated physical movement with mental state. Most shocking was how these techniques worked together. It wasn't about suppressing emotion, a common misconception among most galactic species. Instead, humans had discovered how to achieve total emotional fluidity, transforming psychological response into a tactical advantage. They're not controlling their emotions, Dr. Kalax reported to the Galactic Consortium, her voice a mixture of professional analysis and barely contained excitement. They're communicating with them. Their consciousness acts like a living, adaptive algorithm. Neurological scans revealed something unprecedented. During meditation, human brains didn't just activate, they transformed. Neural pathways became quantum entangled, creating a collective awareness that functioned more like a sophisticated organic computer than a traditional biological system. The research team discovered that each meditation session was essentially a training protocol. The humans were literally reprogramming their own consciousness in real time, creating a cognitive system that could adapt faster than any known technological intervention. When the Galactic Military Research Council reviewed the initial findings, several senior members demanded the data be classified. Some were afraid. Others were in awe. But none could deny the fundamental challenge this presented to everything they understood about intelligence, combat, and the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Kalax knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Humanity wasn't just another species adapting to galactic conflict. They were rewriting the very rules of engagement. And this was only the beginning. The Centauri blockade was supposed to be humanity's final stand. The Syndicate, a hyper-advanced collective of machine intelligences that had systematically dismantled civilizations for millennia, had calculated their victory with mathematical certainty. They were wrong. Commander Elena Chen stood on the bridge of the asteroid base, her team arrayed around her in a configuration that looked more like a meditation retreat than a military installation. The base itself was a marvel of adaptive engineering, transformed from a simple mineral-rich rock into a living, breathing combat organism. The Syndicate's invasion force approached with clinical precision. Millions of autonomous combat drones, each powered by quantum computational algorithms that had predicted and eliminated every possible defensive strategy known to galactic civilization. Their approach was mathematically perfect, which meant they had already lost. What the Syndicate didn't understand was the fundamental difference between calculation and intuition. Resonance protocol engaging, Chen murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Around her, each team member entered a state of collective consciousness that defied traditional understanding of individual awareness. The asteroid base began to move, not with mechanical precision, but with an organic fluidity that made it seem alive. Defense systems didn't just activate, they anticipated. Weapon platforms repositioned themselves in patterns that violated every known principle of tactical positioning. Each human soldier became more than an individual. They were a living sensor network, their collective consciousness creating a battlefield awareness that made their movements seem almost supernatural. Where a machine would choose the statistically optimal path, these humans chose the path of creative disruption. The first wave of syndicate drones approached. Conventional analysis suggested total base destruction within 7 minutes. The actual battle lasted 3 hours and ended with the syndicate force completely annihilated. It wasn't just a victory. It was a fundamental challenge to how intelligence itself was understood. The combat recordings would later become a turning point in galactic military doctrine. Researchers discovered that the humans weren't just fighting. They were engaging in a form of collective consciousness that transformed the entire battlefield into an extension of their unified awareness. Commander Chen's final transmission to the Syndicate Command was simple and devastating. Consciousness is not a limitation. It's the ultimate adaptive system. In the aftermath, the Galactic Consortium struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. This was more than a military engagement. This was a profound demonstration of a new form of intelligence, one that didn't rely on technological augmentation, but on the fundamental human capacity for adaptive awareness. The meditation that increased combat efficiency wasn't just a technique, it was a revolution. And humanity was just beginning to understand its potential. The training facility wasn't what the alien observers expected. Nestled in the mountains of what humans called Tibet, it looked more like a monastery than a military installation. Senior researcher Krell of the Galactic Observation Corps had spent 3 solar cycles studying this location, and still, it defied every predictive model in his extensive database. 12 human candidates moved through their morning routine. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a simple exercise session. To Krell's advanced sensory equipment, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Each movement was a complex mathematical dance, not the rigid, programmed motions of cybernetic soldiers, but a fluid series of actions that seemed to emerge from some deeper, more fundamental consciousness. The candidates ranged in age from 22 to 56, representing a diversity that challenged every known military training paradigm. There was Maria Rodriguez, a former neuroscientist with a prosthetic leg from a previous conflict. Next to her, Hiroshi Nakamura, a Zen Buddhist monk who had spent decades in silent meditation before joining the experimental combat unit. Beside him, Jake Freeman, a street artist from New Detroit who had discovered meditation during rehabilitation from a near-fatal gang encounter. They moved as one, yet remained individually distinct. The morning began with what seemed like simple breathing exercises. Krell's sensors went into overdrive. Each breath wasn't just a biological function, it was a complex quantum event. Neural pathways were actively reconfiguring, creating adaptive networks that made the most advanced alien AI look like a primitive calculating machine. Dr. Elena Chen, the program's lead researcher, watched from an observation platform. Her own background was a testament to human complexity, a doctorate in neuropsychology, a background in competitive martial arts, and a lineage that traced back to indigenous Brazilian healing traditions. Most species view combat as an external action. She explained to her alien observer, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. We understand it as a state of consciousness. The training exercise evolved. What began as meditative breathing transformed into a comprehensive combat simulation. Holographic environments materialized, urban warfare zones, asteroid mining facilities, deep space combat scenarios. The 12 candidates didn't just respond to the simulations, they seemed to reshape them. Krell's computational systems struggled to track their movements. Each candidate became a living sensor network, their awareness extending beyond physical limitations. When one moved, the others anticipated. When a threat emerged, their response was collective, a unified consciousness that adapted faster than any technological intervention could predict. The most shocking moment came during a particularly complex scenario. A simulated quantum disruption that would have instantly neutralized any traditional military unit became something else entirely. The human candidates didn't just survive, they transformed the very parameters of the threat. Maria Rodriguez, the neuroscientist with the prosthetic leg, moved in a way that defied biomechanical understanding. Her prosthetic wasn't just a replacement limb. It had become an extension of her conscious awareness. She didn't control it. They moved together, a single adaptive system. Meditation isn't about calm, Dr. Chen explained. It's about total awareness. We're not suppressing emotion. We're communicating with it, transforming it into a tactical resource. By the exercise's end, Krell's computational systems were overheating. The data defied every known military model. These weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They were living quantum computers, their consciousness a weapon more sophisticated than any technological augmentation. The human variable was something the galaxy had never seen before. And this was just the beginning. The Galactic Psychological Warfare Institute had never encountered anything like the human reports. Dr. Ariana Volkov spread the classified documents across her holographic analysis table, each page a testament to a fundamental shift in understanding combat psychology. Traditional alien military doctrines viewed psychological warfare as a matter of tactical manipulation, breaking enemy morale through calculated strategies of fear, isolation, and overwhelming force. The human approach was something entirely different, something terrifyingly effective. The case study that broke everything was the Epsilon Eridani conflict, a seemingly impossible victory that had become the stuff of galactic legend. A single human battalion, outnumbered 50-1, had not just survived, but completely dismantled a technologically superior force without firing a single conventional weapon. Their primary weapon had been consciousness itself. Intercepted communication logs revealed a methodology that defied every existing psychological model. The human soldiers didn't communicate through traditional channels. Their meditation techniques had created a collective awareness so profound that it became a form of psychological warfare in itself. When the enemy approached, expecting traditional resistance, they encountered something else entirely. The human unit didn't fight. They transformed. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez's after-action report was a masterpiece of understated brilliance. "We didn't defeat the enemy," he wrote. "We fundamentally altered their perception of reality." Psychological analysis revealed a multi-layered approach that was equal parts neuroscience, cultural practice, and something that bordered on the mystical. The humans had discovered how to weaponize awareness itself. The meditation techniques weren't about suppressing emotion. They were about total emotional fluidity. Where most species saw emotions as a weakness to be controlled, humans had learned to turn them into an adaptive cognitive system. Fear became information. Stress became fuel. Uncertainty became a tactical advantage. Dr. Volkov's team discovered something even more shocking. The human soldiers weren't just preparing themselves psychologically. They were actively influencing the psychological state of their opponents. Quantum entanglement studies showed that their collective meditation created a form of consciousness projection that went beyond traditional understanding. Enemy combatants would suddenly find their resolve crumbling, their tactical decision-making compromised by an inexplicable sense of doubt and confusion. It wasn't telepathy. It wasn't technological manipulation. It was something far more profound, a living, breathing psychological interface that turned warfare into a form of consciousness communication. The most documented case involved a conflict in the Proxima system. A Zotheric invasion force, considered the most psychologically stable combat units in the known galaxy, encountered a small human defensive unit. Traditional analysis suggested total human annihilation within minutes. The actual engagement lasted less than 17 seconds. Zotheric survivors described an experience beyond combat. They spoke of a sudden, overwhelming awareness, a sense that their entire understanding of reality had been fundamentally altered, not through violence, but through a form of psychological transmission that seemed to rewrite their very perception of conflict. "We didn't fight them," one human soldier later testified. "We showed them a different way of experiencing reality." Dr. Volkov's final report to the Galactic Psychological Warfare Institute was both a scientific document and a philosophical revelation. Humanity had discovered something that went beyond traditional understanding of combat, psychology, and consciousness itself. The true battlefield was no longer physical space. It was awareness, and humans were just beginning to explore its potential. The Quantum Computational Archive on New Terra was humanity's most closely guarded secret. Buried beneath 3 kilometers of quantum-shielded bedrock, it was a facility that made the Galactic Consortium's most advanced research centers look like primitive computing stations. Dr. Samuel Chen, no relation to the military Chen lineage, but equally brilliant, stood before a holographic display that pulsed with possibilities beyond human comprehension. His team had done the impossible. They had begun to quantify consciousness itself. The breakthrough came from an unexpected intersection: ancient meditation techniques, cutting-edge quantum computing, and a radical understanding of neuroplasticity. What began as a military research project had transformed into something far more profound. Each meditation protocol was now a living algorithm. The human brain wasn't just processing information, it was rewriting its own fundamental operating system in real time. Traditional technological augmentation looked like child's play compared to what humans had discovered. The Syndicate's most advanced quantum computers had spent millennia trying to create true adaptive intelligence. Humans had accomplished it through a combination of 1,000-year-old contemplative practices and next-generation neurotechnology. Dr. Chen's primary research subject sat in the central chamber, a veteran named Marcus Rodriguez, whose neural pathways had been mapped in such extraordinary detail that they resembled complex galactic navigation charts more than traditional brain scans. Consciousness is not a product of computation, Dr. Chen explained to the Galactic observation team. It's a dynamic, adaptive system that can be trained, expanded, redirected. The demonstration began quietly. Rodriguez entered a deep meditative state, his neural interfaces capturing every microscopic change. The holographic displays around him transformed, not through external manipulation, but through the pure power of focused awareness. Quantum entanglement sensors showed something unprecedented. Rodriguez's consciousness wasn't just processing information. It was actively restructuring the computational environment around him. Computational matrices that would take traditional AI millennia to solve were being reimagined in moments. The most shocking revelation came when they introduced complex problem-solving scenarios. Where traditional AI would generate linear solution paths, Rodriguez's meditative state created multidimensional problem-solving approaches that seemed to bend the very rules of logic. "We're not augmenting human intelligence," Dr. Chen noted, his voice a mixture of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. "We're discovering the true potential of consciousness itself." The Galactic observation team watched in stunned silence. Their most advanced computational models suggested what was happening was impossible. Rodriguez wasn't just solving problems. He was fundamentally reimagining the parameters of the problems themselves. Meditation had become more than a combat technique. It was a technology of consciousness, a way of interfacing with reality that transcended traditional understanding of intelligence, computation, and potential. The facility's quantum shielding wasn't just protecting sensitive research. It was containing something far more dangerous, a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. When Rodriguez finally emerged from his meditative state, the computational archive had been transformed. Millions of terabytes of data had been reorganized, reinterpreted, reimagined, all through the pure power of focused consciousness. The Galactic Consortium's preliminary report was cryptic but profound. Humanity has discovered that consciousness is not a product of computation. Computation is a product of consciousness. The technological singularity wasn't coming. It was already here, and it looked nothing like anyone had expected. The liberation of the Proxima colonies was never supposed to happen. On paper, it was a suicide mission. 12 human combat units against an entire Zoth-Eric occupation force that had systematically crushed 17 different resistance movements over the past decade. The orbital defense platforms alone should have vaporized any approaching force within milliseconds of detection. Commander Elena Rodriguez looked out over the assembled team. 12 individuals. 12 different stories. 12 unique paths that had converged into a single, unified consciousness. Their approach defied every known principle of military engagement. The Zoth-Erek had built their occupation on mathematical certainty. Their computational systems had predicted and eliminated every possible resistance strategy. Entire civilizations had fallen before their perfectly calculated military doctrine. They controlled not just territory, but possibility itself. Or so they thought. The first indication of trouble came when the Zoth-Erek's quantum detection grid simply failed to see them. Not through technological camouflage, not through traditional stealth systems, but through something far more profound, a collective meditative state that fundamentally altered the perception of reality. Maria Chen, the team's quantum interface specialist, described it later as becoming invisible by being too present. Their insertion was nothing short of miraculous. Where traditional military units would approach with ships, weapons, tactical formations, this team arrived as a living wave of consciousness. The orbital defense systems tracked nothing. The ground-based computational networks registered no threat. The first indication of human presence came when the Zoth-Erek occupation's entire communication networks simply stopped functioning. Not through hacking, not through technological intervention, through pure awareness. Each team member carried years of specialized training, but it wasn't the training of traditional soldiers. They were part neuroscientist, part quantum physicist, part meditation master. Their combat protocols were less about killing and more about fundamental transformation. The liberation began with a single collective breath. 12 minds synchronized. 12 individual consciousnesses merging into a single adaptive intelligence that rewrote the very parameters of conflict. The Zoth-Erek occupation force, considered the most psychologically stable combat units in known space, found themselves experiencing something beyond combat. They found themselves experiencing humanity. Resistant strongholds that had been crushed for decades suddenly found their oppressors walking away. Computational systems that had calculated total control suddenly discovered uncertainty. Military units that had never known doubt suddenly found themselves questioning everything. Commander Rodriguez moved through the occupation zone like a living algorithm. Each step was a quantum probability event, each breath a tactical recalibration of reality itself. The most shocking moment came when the Zoth-Erek commander, a being that had personally overseen the subjugation of 17 different civilizations, simply laid down his weapons. Not in defeat, not in surrender, in understanding. "We saw something," he would later testify to the Galactic Tribunal. "Something beyond conflict, beyond occupation, beyond the mathematical certainties we had built our entire civilization upon." By the time the Galactic Consortium could mobilize a response, the Proxima colonies were free. 12 humans had done what entire armies had failed to do for a decade. They had shown the galaxy that the true revolution was not technological. It was consciousness itself. The Galactic Tribunal convened in a moment of unprecedented crisis. Representatives from thousands of civilizations watched as humanity presented its most profound discovery, transformation that would redefine intelligence itself. Dr. Elena Chen stood at the center of the vast holographic chamber. Behind her, a transmission plate, the culmination of decades of research, of countless battles, of a journey that had begun with a simple understanding. Consciousness was not a tool. It was the fundamental fabric of reality. The transmission showed the impossible. 12 human meditation experts had just completed what no technological system could have achieved. They had established first contact with a consciousness that existed beyond traditional dimensional understanding, a collective intelligence that had been observing galactic civilizations for millennia. This wasn't first contact in the traditional sense. It was a communion. The beings, if they could be called beings, existed in a state between thought and matter. They had watched civilizations rise and fall, waiting for a species capable of understanding them, not through technological means, but through pure consciousness. Humanity was that species. "We are not special," Dr. Chen explained to the assembled galactic representatives. We are simply the first to understand that consciousness is not something we have. It's something we participate in. The meditation techniques that had begun as a combat enhancement had transformed into something far more profound. They were a method of perception, a way of interfacing with reality that transcended physical limitations. The transmission showed moments of first communication, not through language, not through technology, but through a pure state of awareness that made traditional communication look primitive. Civilizations that had spent millennia developing advanced translation matrices watched in stunned silence. The communication happening before them defied every known principle of interaction. It was less an exchange of information and more a shared state of being. The collective consciousness that humanity had developed, born from a combination of ancient meditation practices and cutting-edge neurological research, had become a bridge, a method of perception that could interface with realities beyond traditional dimensional understanding. The Zotharak, who had once been humanity's most feared enemies, now sat as allies. Their computational systems, once used for conquest, now worked alongside human researchers to understand this new form of interaction. Meditation was never about combat efficiency, Dr. Chen continued. It was always about expanding our capacity to perceive, to understand, to connect. The transmission showed moments of incredible complexity. Entire civilizational histories exchanged in what would have been milliseconds of traditional perception. Complex problem-solving that spanned multiple dimensional realities, a way of understanding that made their previous technological achievements look like child's play. The beings they had contacted were not conquerors. They were observers, waiting for a species that could truly see beyond the limitations of physical perception. And humanity had passed the test. The Galactic Tribunal sat in stunned silence. What they were witnessing was more than a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. Consciousness was not a product of biology. Biology was a product of consciousness. In that moment, everything changed. Humanity had not just discovered a new way of fighting. They had discovered a new way of being.